Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the IAM CX Podcast. I am Roger Nicholas, Director of Customer Experience at Island Analytics and Marketing, and we have a special one here for you. We're going to get into SaaS and the SaaS industry and SaaS challenges. It's going to get sassy. Yes, I said it. It's going to get sassy. Before we get into introducing our guest, let me also introduce my co-producer and CEO, Richard Dorsey. Thank you again for partnering and believing in us. And our special guest today is Mr. Greg Daines. And this episode, ladies and gentlemen, we've entitled The 4 Playbooks of Customer Loyalty. It's simpler than you think. Trust me, you're going to enjoy this one. So Greg Daines, also known as the Churn Doctor and CEO of ChurnRX, is the SaaS industry's leading expert on customer churn and driving durable growth. Throughout his career as a founder, a CEO, customer success leader, and consultant, he has made a habit of challenging conventional thinking. Trust me, he will challenge you today. And Greg is widely known for his groundbreaking research on customer churn and growth, and his unique talent for helping companies solve customer churn and build durable growth. And he supports that with a churn management platform, a fractional CCO offering, as well as consulting and training. Greg was a frequent keynote speaker and podcast guest, works closely with industry leaders as an executive coach and business transformation consultant, and writes extensively on topics of customer success and SaaS growth. And we always bring the best for our guests. Greg holds advanced degrees in economics and business from MIT and Cambridge University. So we may have to use our proper English today. All right. Please welcome Greg Daines.
Thank you. I appreciate
Greg.
it.
Yeah. Look, man, I just before we jump in, Richard likes to ask the first question, but I want to say this before he does. I've followed you for some time now on LinkedIn. I love how you make me rejig what I think I know about customer experience. While what I know about customer experience is usually non-SaaS related mostly, I've learned a lot in the short time that just following you alone. So I was excited to hear your yes, and then to have this get started so that we can educate our region and everyone listening. So thank you for saying yes to this. This is a passion for us. We actually think we could save the world with customer experience and this type of education. So thank you for being as foolish as we are.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Richard, you want to jump in?
Definitely. So one of the things that's interesting about this podcast series is everyone in the CX space, they have like a different raison d'etre within CX, and that's very interesting. And I wanted to know why retention management, as vanilla as it could be, why was that your passion? Why did you see that as the main issue to focus your intellect, your ingenuity, your creativity around?
It's a great question. Nobody, goes to school and studies customer experience, right? It's something that we all found a different pathway toward. And my pathway is very specific. I was a founder CEO in the SaaS world 4 times over. And I, everything you do when you're founder CEO, as you know, is challenging. Like you got to raise money, you got to come up with a product, you have to sell it, you have to, right? But of all the things that I did, there was one I found to be the most challenging and the most confusing. And when I came to a point where I was either choose to do another startup or do something else, I realized that I actually wanted to focus on the hardest challenge that I had experienced in all that time. And that challenge was making my customers successful consistently. That was extremely elusive challenge, right? And one of the reasons it's confusing is in the SaaS world, but it's true for any company. You give everyone the same product. They're all buying the same thing, roughly, and you give them all the same experience, more or less, but they have wildly different experiences, all the way from super successful and incredible and bragging about you and, making commercials for you or standing on the stage for you, all the way to nothing, or they hate you. Yeah. And this variation just didn't make sense. How do you explain it if they're all consuming the same thing? That's the challenge that was really fascinating to me. And I realized that it isn't just in SaaS, but it's particularly acute in any subscription business or any business where you want and need long-term loyalty. it's not a trivial question. We've got to unpack this. We have to figure this thing out. And I realized we hadn't figured it out. And lots of things that people were saying, right? The smart people that talk about how to keep customers and all that, I would apply them and they wouldn't work. And this drove me crazy. Happened over and over again. So I slowly realized that we didn't understand this. And that's, of course, what makes it the most interesting, right? We want to work on the hardest problems. So that's how I ended up kind of focusing on this and devoting myself to this.
Wow. I like your perseverance, because you kind of went against the winds and into the storm on that one. Was there, in your career, was there an aha moment where something started to make sense, where you kind of saw the matrix, that wonderful Neo moment that everybody hopefully gets to have once in a lifetime? Did you see that somewhere within retention management? Did you find it?
There were actually two moments like that. I'm glad you asked it that way, because the first one is an experience almost everybody who's worked with customers has had. And it creates dissonance for everybody. I know this because I talk to groups all the time. But what I noticed was, right, because we all know the foundational belief in business for 20 years has been happy customers stay and unhappy customers leave, right? But here's what would happen all the time. I'd have a customer leave and on the way out sincerely tell you what a great experience it was working with my company. And I'd just be like, well, if it was a great experience, why are you leaving, right? That didn't compute. Then the other thing that would happen is that I'd have a customer who was unhappy and constantly complaining and nothing was ever good enough, and yet they would keep renewing. I mean, this drove me crazy, right? Because this did not map at all. It wasn't like an occasional experience. It was constantly like this. And so my daily experience contradicted the most fundamental belief system we have about business. And then the second aha moment was very clear. So I had this customer, it was Apple, and they were the toughest customer I ever had, the most unpleasant, the most unhappy, the most demanding, the most difficult, just brutal. And I was over there all the time. I lived in Silicon Valley. I'd be at their offices. And we got to this point where I actually kind of lost it. And I was in their office and I said, time out. If you hate us so much, why don't you just cancel, right? End your contract with us. And the guy looked at me kind of confused and he said, why would we cancel when you make us so much money? And, my reaction was to feel a little bit embarrassed, because why did I ever think it was about anything else? Where did we get this idea that we were in that room together, we're in that relationship, working hard on those things for the pleasure of it, for the happiness of it? That's not why we were in a relationship. They were spending millions of dollars on us, and we were breaking our brains every day trying to make good on what they wanted from us. And nothing about that is about happiness. And we've really taken this too far. So it was that moment I thought, maybe we're looking at this completely wrong, right? And so, that was the other kind of bing, and it started me down this road of examining, is it even true, right? Is it even true that happier customers stay longer? Or is there a more interesting view of the customer relationship going on? So that was kind of a key moment for me.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's amazing. Roger, I think we need to bring him into the Caribbean fast, because we have that problem here locally where you have a large portion of unsatisfied customers that are immensely loyal to brands and companies. And it boggles our minds every day. And I think you gave us a little insight into that. Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah.
Okay, but based on the scope of the problem in the Caribbean, we may need to buy Greg a house.
Yes.
I really like this idea. We definitely.
Yeah. What you might. Utah is beautiful though.
In the snow right now up here. So, but here's the interesting thing. So I decided, look, we better check. Has anyone bothered to check to see if happy customers stay longer than unhappy customers? And it turned out, not really. We just assumed it. And there are various studies out there that sort of kind of on a sideways look kind of seemed to show that, but there was no real detailed proof. So I started to assemble data. At first, it was my company's data. And we just looked at our customers, and we had customer satisfaction scores for many of them. And so I would just compare. If you gave a good satisfaction score, did it mean you had a longer average life? And no, the answer was no. And so then I started to look, well, maybe that's just our company. So we started to look bigger and bigger. Well, over the years, in the work that I do now, one of the things we do is analyze your churn data. And we look at all your customers and retention and all that stuff. And one of the things we test for is that. And so now we actually have a huge database, millions of records. And also in the meantime, another lucky thing happened, which is that everybody decided to use the same satisfaction scale, which is NPS. Not everybody, but most people, right? Most companies. And so we started to be able to test this at scale. And now we have the world's largest study on this. And guess what? Customer satisfaction scores do not correlate at all with customer lifespan.
Wow.
Happier customers do not stay any longer than unhappy customers at all. It's not a weak effect, it's zero. Isn't that interesting?
This guy is
No, look, no, the question I have is, and I'm sure the listeners will have too, is when you say satisfaction, customer satisfaction, are you lumping in customer loyalty as NPS is supposed to measure, or are you saying customer satisfaction as in CSAT scores?
So initially I'm saying NPS score does not correlate with life span, but we have also tested other customer satisfaction scales.
Right.
None of them have ever correlated. We've never tested a satisfaction scale that predicts customer loyalty at all. So all this time we've just been assuming that was true. It makes sense. It's intuitive. It's logical. It's appealing. But it turns out it's just not true. And if you go back to that experience that I had with that customer Apple, you can see why. They were actually not very happy with us, but they were making money. And so this is the interesting thing. And this maybe is the end to this loop. So I just started to say, well, if it's not customer satisfaction, then what is it? Something must predict. They came for something. And I was thinking about that Apple thing, but the database that we have allows us to test everything. So you could almost name anything, and we've tested it. And hopefully we'll get into a few of them later. And actually a lot of things correlate with customer lifespan. But there's just one that is by far and away the best predictor of customer lifespan. And it's whether the customer got results.
Hey, we don't let it in the bag yet. Wait, we've got to set it up. We got to to that.
All right.
Go back down to it.
Roger, before I turn it over to you, I got to say, Greg, after you're finished conquering CX and all the mysteries of it, please go over to physics. They need a brain like yours to unravel theories that they believe in.
To challenge everything, Is it gravity or are we just overweight? You figure that.
Right.
Yeah, that's great science. But look, let me dive into this next question because we want to respect your time. There's a popular belief that focusing on reducing customer churn is a viable strategy for business growth, especially in SaaS. Do you agree? And in your answer, could you explain for the audience the difference between a retention management strategy and a churn reduction strategy, and why C-suite needs to know the difference, especially in SaaS?
Yeah. So churn is a very important signal about what's working and not working. But no, you cannot win on a churn reduction strategy. And there's a very simple reason why. You can only get churn down so low, right? Sales presumably could go up forever, in theory, possible, right? But churn can't go down very much. There's a limit, right? Now, if you have a lot, you can bring it down a lot, but there's a limit. And the limit, by the way, is not zero churn. Zero churn is not possible. Zero churn is a silly idea. That just means zero growth, because what we do is we make bets on customers, right? So some of those bets won't pay off. It's okay. If you want zero churn, you have to have zero growth. So, but low churn. Let's just say low churn. That's the goal, right? Low enough that it's not in the way of growth. Okay, so that means, but there's a problem with that. Let's say we get churn down low enough that it's low. It's low enough, right? Okay, good, fair enough. How come we can't grow on that? Well, because the other side of the growth equation is sales, right? And so And so if you don't have sales, it doesn't matter how low churn is. So that's the other thing. But it turns out that no matter how high your sales are, eventually you can't grow even with low churn. And there's a mathematical reality behind this, but the intuition is, as long as sales doesn't grow exponentially, let's just say it grows linearly, but it could be very vigorous growth. Let's say it's 50% growth per year in sales. As long as it's not exponential, eventually the number churning, even if it's low, will equal the number you sell, and you will have flat growth. That's why all recurring revenue businesses will ultimately have flat growth, except for one thing. There is a way out, because you might be wondering, well, then how did Salesforce get to 65 billion or whatever they are? And the answer is, you don't get there by selling more than you churn. You get there by expanding your existing customers, selling more to your existing customers, right? So when you sell a new customer, all you've really done is introduce them into the mall. How much money you make off that customer, how long they stay in the mall, and how much they buy. So Salesforce has proven, and lots of our bigger SaaS companies have proven, that the long-term growth strategy is about, yes, you must sell a whole bunch of customers and not lose them very much, right? But then you have to figure out how to sell them more and more and more. And if what they're buying is results, then what you're selling is more results. So this is what Salesforce does very well, but other companies have figured this out. Every time you accomplish something with their solution, they come back to you and say, hey, would you like to accomplish something else? Would you like this additional value? Here's how you do it. And so the long-term growth strategy is not a churn reduction strategy. You have to reduce churn or you'll fail, but that's not the strategy. The strategy is expansion, retention and expansion. That's the win.
So cross-selling and upselling with the current customer.
Exactly.
In addition to the retention.
Exactly. Well, you have to retain them or you can't sell them anything. You have to keep them in the mall, right?
Close the doors. Put lasers and Rottweilers outside. Yep. I get you.
Yep. Great.
That's an awesome piece of information right there. And I like how succinct you put it too. I mean, our audience is going to appreciate that. What do you think, Richard?
I'm ready to give him the Nobel Prize for CX. So I like his deep thoughts, but his very straightforward responses, and I'm really enjoying the vibe. So I have a question. It's a little personal gripe of mine. I use a certain platform a lot. I will not name them lest they red flag me one of these days. But it's a popular marketing strategy in SaaS to offer free trials and discounts. Can you tell us what your research has uncovered about the effectiveness of this strategy in attracting customers or improving retention? And I got a little extra to this. So the company that I will not mention, if you're dissatisfied with their service and you want to end your subscription, they offer you either a 3-month discount on the back end, or they'll offer you like a 1-month free additional so that you don't close out the account. So I'm lumping the two together. So for attracting new customers and keeping old customers, why do you think the discount can or cannot work?
Okay, let's do the free trial first. We have a lot of research on every item you mentioned, so I'll go quickly. What we know is that companies that offer a free trial have much higher churn. And the question is why? The value of a free trial is you can sell more. So it has value. For sure, you will get more people to try your solution, right? Will you get more of them to upgrade to the paid version? That's a question. It depends on, I've seen it work well, and I've seen it not work well. So you potentially can if you do it right. But there's a problem, and the problem is that it will certainly increase your churn. But why? Why would it increase churn? Well, the answer is, when you go buy something like a new solution, right, for your business, and you think this is going to help my business, you're putting money out, and then now it's time to actually do something, to learn it, to master it, to fix it, to work it. And that's a lot of time, and you have other things to do. But you're thinking, I put money into that. I'm going to lose all that money and plus not achieve my goal if I don't work on it. Okay, so you go and you follow the training videos and you do, right? Okay. But here's the problem. So some customers will be motivated to pay you, and then having paid you, they'll be motivated to work really hard to get good results, because it's the customers who get good results that stay, right? If you don't get results, eventually you'll just churn. Okay, fair enough. So now I take the same solution and I offer a free trial. Now that same customer who would have paid and worked really hard to implement now has the option to do it for free. Now the question is, will they work as hard having paid nothing for it as they would have worked having paid something for it? And the answer is no. They don't work as hard. So then when the free trial ends in 30 days or 10 days or whatever, they'll have a new crisis. And the crisis is, did I get results? Well, the answer, of course, is no. You didn't do anything yet. You're not going to get results, or you didn't do enough. And so then they'll think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get results. I better not. So what happens is they put a lower level of investment in because they didn't pay something for it. And there's a psychology to that, right? People who pay for something value it more and work harder. Well, it's the valuing it and working harder that makes you get results, not the product. The product doesn't produce results. Your adoption of it and the changing of the way you work is what produces results. So free trials do increase churn. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a free trial. Okay, so let's be clear. A lot of startups get a lot of value out of offering a free trial so they can enter a market, right? Because it can be very hard to enter a market. And right at that moment, churn may not actually be your biggest problem. So there are definitely situations where a free trial makes sense. The only time it doesn't make sense, right? So all these companies come to me and they say, we have too much churn. What do we do? Well, one of the first things I'll say is eliminate your free trial. Oh no, that's key to our success. No, it was key to your success. Now it's causing so much churn that you're going to go out of business. So it's possible that it's the right strategy. It's also possible that it's the right strategy for a phase, and then you need to phase it out. So that's the issue with free trials. Some companies can still offer free trials and it doesn't create too much churn. But we know that they would have less churn, right, if they didn't have the free trial. So the question is it worth it? And there's always a trade-off, right? So it's fine. There may be a value trade-off. The point is our research is very clear that it will increase churn. Okay, now you talked about the discount or the free month or the various things that companies do to try to keep you.
Yeah.
Now, this is a classic cable company kind of move, right? I want to cancel and, we'll give you 6 months or we'll free this or whatever. So we have research on this, very interesting. We call these rescues. So that's a rescue motion, right? Customers leaving and we have a rescue play. We're going to try to do this or that. Well, you can rescue customers, right? But the question is, how often does it work and how well does it work? So those are two separate issues. So in the SaaS world, this is a really common thing to do. They want to cancel, you offer them free 6 months or whatever. What we found is that a very small portion of customers will be saved, will be rescued. Very few of them will renew, but some will. Let's say it's 10%. That looks reasonably like what the data shows. So let's say 10% of them will take you up on your offer and stay. The question is, how long do they stay? And so we actually ran research on this. A rescued customer churns at twice the rate as any other customer. So the reality is you might be just delaying the inevitable. In many cases, so we only rescue a few, and even those mostly churn. So the sad part is this, and then there's one other piece of research that relates to this, Richard, which you may find interesting, which is some companies are so worried about losing money that when a customer comes to them and says, I need to downsell, I need a lower cost plan, right? That they just say, no, you can't. You have to stay at the level you're at. Well, what those companies don't realize is that customer has another option. That is just to leave.
Exactly.
Right? So guess what? That's exactly what the research shows. If you make it hard for your customers to downsell, your churn will go up. But here's the fascinating thing. Customers who are allowed to downsell to a lower level have significantly longer average lifespans than customers who never change the value.
Wow, that's kind of groundbreaking right there.
Right? And the question is, what's the insight? Like, why is that true? Because aren't they downselling because they're leaving? No, they're downselling to keep. Yeah. If they were leaving, they'd just leave. What they're saying is, I actually want this service. I need this service. I want to keep this service, but I can't afford it. And right now, I don't need it all. So can I go for what they're sending a signal that this is actually valuable to them, not that it's not valuable. And so a lot of companies have made this mistake that they get in the way of you downselling. Actually, we have run a number of times with my clients. We've run a play where we proactively reach out to customers who aren't using the platform very much, and we say, would you like a lower value plan? And it increases retention. So we have to be very careful about, I don't know if that addresses your question, Richard.
Oh,
but
definitely.
Yeah, like more than that, but it also highlights if we're not paying attention to what the customer is really saying, if we're not listening, what kinds of opportunities are lost and how much it could cost us. Because cost to serve, even though it attracts customers with discounts and all that type of stuff, but like you mentioned before, when a customer has a challenge, and we try to rescue them, it's costing us even more.
Mm-hmm.
And so the cost to serve becomes out of control at that point. And for SaaS companies, that's a major problem, because they're starting in the hole most of the time before they can hit zero. So
we're right. So here's one other interesting thing. We've tested discounts. So upfront discounts, like selling, right? So I'll give you, if you buy today, I'll give you 50% off, right? This is a common method. Do you think those customers churn at a higher rate?
I don't know anymore. You're breaking physics, so I'm just going to wait for the answer.
It turns out, if you offer a customer a steep discount, this doesn't apply to a small discount like, I don't know, 10, 15, 20%. But if you go deeper than that, those customers start to churn at a higher rate. And it's the same psychology as before. You just gave me 75% off. I don't value it anymore. I'm not going to work very hard, and I'm not going to get results. So eventually I'm going to leave. Yeah, it turns out discounting increases churn.
Whoa, ground shaking.
I feel bad for those who are listening right now who they thought the world was flat, but they realize it's...
That's exactly what this is tantamount to. They thought the world was flat. You're right. Well said, Richard. All right. Okay. I see a pattern here. I see the desire to want to keep you here all day, but I think you have a life, Greg. So let's get through these questions, get you out of here on time. But we may have to get him back, right, Richard?
I'd be happy to.
Part 3, not even part 2.
There we go. Skip to part 3. So my question is, you've always been big on driving measurable results as the focus of retaining customers and driving business growth. So what are those measurable results that will increase C-suite's appreciation and buy-in of a retention management strategy? And that's the question. Or even customer success within a retention management stack.
Yeah. Well, there's two ways to look at this. The number one way I look at it is the customer's results are the best predictor of their retention, right? So actually, one thing that not enough companies do, in fact, almost no companies do this, is to actually measure your customers' results. If you think about the things we measure about our customers, how satisfied they are, how good their retention is, right? Their renewal, their expansion, right? Those aren't measures of their success. Those are measures of our success. That's what we get out of the relationship. So one thing I recommend, companies start measuring your customers' results. Figure out what they are, and then figure out how to measure them or estimate them. If you don't care about their results, you kind of don't really care about them. I don't believe a company's customer-centric if they're not measuring their customers' results. Okay. It's not the same thing as customer satisfaction, which is kind of like saying, do you like me? Do you love me? How much do you love me? That's what satisfaction is. Okay. So that's one thing. But then on the other side, to your question, how do we speak to the C-suite? What can we show them that provides compelling motivation for them to support these things? And I mean, one of the simplest thing is churn costs you so much money. So when I show you that we can bring churn down even a little bit, and by the way, we usually bring it down a lot, but even a little bit is worth lots of money. And you can usually easily calculate that. So instead of saying, churn went from 90% to, 90, or retention went from 90 to 95%. Say that was $1 million worth of retention we just achieved, because they rarely calculate that. They rarely look at it in dollars and really appreciate what that means, right? So a lot of times we're focused on sales and, give free trials and discounts, and we're not calculating the cost in churn, which can be really catastrophic. So that's one. And then the other one is, you can't expand a customer. You can't sell them more if they're gone, right? So the other side of that is, what is the money we're making? What is the work we're doing to sell more to our customers? Don't just think about retention. Think about what are we, what's that customer worth in further sales if we could figure out how to get results for them. So those are the two big ones that I would focus on.
So just to use some CX jargon we've taught our audience over the past year, you talked about customer lifetime value, keeping them longer so that you can get a bigger opportunity to expand their share of wallet. And the one you spoke about before, and it's slipping my brain here, so I'm trying to kill time here to figure it out. But you mentioned before that you meant the 2 points you mentioned. One was figuring out what it takes to keep them longer, and the other was
what to sell them more, right? How long they stay in the mall and how much they buy. Those are the two factors, right? Okay.
Right. So I don't want the audience to miss that. That's why I wanted to highlight that. That's really, really critical. Wow. Okay. I'm on fire right now. So Richard, go ahead.
I'm going to keep going off-road. We have our questions, but I'm going to keep going off-road. So you said before that customer satisfaction is not a true predictor of customer lifetime value in any way, shape, or form. No correlation, right? Is customer satisfaction in any way, shape, or form predictive of customer spend?
Okay, that's interesting. So what we found is that it's not a predictor of customer lifetime. Mm-hmm. Now, the question that you're getting more is at the value.
Yeah.
We don't have as good of data on that. So it's very possible that it's a better predictor of spend. I wouldn't say that that's obvious from my experience in the SaaS world, but it might be more indicative of the kind of thing you'd see in a consumer business. So one thing you should know is that we don't have data on consumer businesses. All the data I'm talking about is really B2B. It's like business sales, right? Which makes some sense. They're more focused on making money. They're more, right? Whereas a consumer might be more focused on the experience and the emotional attachment they have, et cetera. That's fine. We see some of that like in the hospitality world, right? Hotels and things like that, where experience is really, really important. But by the way, there was another group that did research on consumer businesses several years ago called the CEB, and they found actually the exact same thing we found, but in consumer world. There was zero correlation between satisfaction and loyalty. But so there's there are situations where a satisfaction score is very helpful. It's just not helpful for retention. It's helpful for judging the effectiveness of specific experiences. So one place that I like to use satisfaction scores, it's not as a general thing. It's not, are you satisfied with the product or the service? Say, are you satisfied with the experience you had in onboarding?
Right.
Right. Are you, yes. Are you satisfied with your stay at the hotel this weekend? Are you, right, specific? And then if they're not, you can dig in a little bit into questions, or if they are, you can also do that. But I think the mistake is not that there's no such, by the way, we know there's such a thing as customer satisfaction, and we know it's important. How do we know that? Well, for one thing, we can measure it very consistently now. Although those metrics don't map to retention, they're very consistent. Companies that get good SAT scores will keep getting good SAT scores. So we know we can measure it well. The second thing is we know what to do to make it better and worse. Pretty generally, over the last 10 years, we've gotten better and better at that. So it's a real thing. My argument isn't that it's fake. It's absolutely real, and it absolutely matters. It just doesn't matter for lifespan. So it's possible, Richard, you raise an interesting point. It's possible it matters for spend or for certain patterns of interaction that we get or for engagement. So I don't want to rule it out for every possible use. I just think we need to be careful not to assume that it means that's a loyal customer. Loyalty has gone down across the board, right? This is something that's more competition, and people are more fickle. The reality is people are just less loyal to brands than they used to. And that's something we just have to accept. But I do think that where you can measure the specific satisfaction with actual interactions, that can be very helpful for improving those interactions.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things you highlighted before was speaking the C-suite love language. When you were talking about, instead of saying 90 to 95% retention, it's $1 million million savings, a million savings on churn. That's a point I wanted to make before. 55 just came back to me and allowed me to remember.
Yeah.
But it's an important thing because our audience, we have a lot of people who are new to the CX space or the CX thought process, and we all get excited about talking about the new jargon and retention and NPS and all those types of things, but we forget to speak the language of the people who have to underwrite it. And so I think it's a really critical point that you mentioned, that regardless of what you're talking about, results and financial impact is the love language of your clients, as well as those who are going to underwrite your customer experience program or your retention management strategy or your customer success team. So Thank you for that. Wow.
Yeah. So
Richard?
I just wanted to make mention. So I know you're in the B2B world, and I'm in the B2B world as well. However, my heart is still in B2C. When you start retail at a young age, you kind of can't give it up. It's your first love. And I just wanted to share with my audience, even though you're hearing SaaS and you're hearing software and subscriptions, what Greg is saying still is relevant to a B2C model. You can't undervalue your product or your service. You can't chase them after you've lost them. You have to keep them from being lost before you try. The flowers at the restaurant when you're breaking up won't keep her or him. That won't work. And also, too, it's interesting that just because you have a wonderful smile and they love you, doesn't mean that they want to spend more money with you. And I have some interesting anecdotal where I remember a customer was livid, almost threw down objects in the store, cursed everybody on the way out, and was there 2 weeks later spending again. And I've seen smiling faces that have never returned to a store. So I just want to package and say, just because we're saying SaaS and we're talking subscriptions and big tech companies, even if you're a brick and mortar, even if you're providing services, these things still matter to you, and you can implement them in your strategies.
And that's something we're going to dive into as one of our last questions too. Where there are transferable skills or strategies from SaaS to everyone else.
Yeah. If you want to take that, Roger, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you've kind of touched on this previous question, so I'm going to skip ahead to this next question. You have a very disruptive opinion on health scores or relying too heavily on lagging indicators in the SaaS industry to predict and manage churn. What do you recommend instead of a health score, and why? And you've touched on it before, but I want it individually spelled out for our listeners.
Yeah. So the problem I see with health scores is that they contain two things that are not helpful. One is they contain things that have nothing to do with retention, like satisfaction. So that's something you can remove from your health score right now. It's irrelevant. The second thing they contain are things that are very good predictors of churn or retention, but that happen too late. So we call them lagging indicators. So in the software world, a good lagging indicator is one that, like, the customer stops using your software, right? We can see they stopped using it. That's a good predictor that customer is going to churn. I could say with almost 100% certainty they're going to churn. The problem is it's already too late to save them. They've already given up. They've already disengaged emotionally. They've stopped trying. So knowing that they stopped using it is really not helpful. And the problem is most of our indicators that we have in health scores are like that. They're lagging indicators. And I talked about when it's too late, you can't save them. You can't rescue them, right? So that's not a winning strategy. So what's a good health score? What would you use instead of a health score? Well, I don't consider this a health score, but it might sound a little bit the same. But one of the things is, well, if they're staying to get results, then what we need to do is figure out what are the factors, what are the things they'll have to do to get results? Because we give them the same product and we give them the same service. So I said it's them that's different. So the question is, what are they doing differently? What do the successful customers do? So let's say, your software is email marketing. They're going to have a list to send the emails to. They're going to have products and pictures and descriptions to put in the emails, right? And then they're going to have a calendar to know how to keep sending them out, because success in that is mostly about how many emails you send. Well, what we found when we've worked with companies that are in this space is that the customers were failing because they didn't have a list or they didn't have the product photos and descriptions. You think, well, gosh, that's a dumb thing to trip over. Well, yeah, but people fail for lots of reasons. They don't fail just because they didn't use your solution, right? In fact, mostly they fail for other reasons. So what did we do in that situation? We taught the customers how to get the pictures taken, the copy written, and the calendar put together. So those were 3 lessons. You think it has nothing to do with using the software, but it was the critical element for success. Okay, so here's how I know a customer is going to fail in that scenario. They don't have a list. They didn't get it put in, right? They didn't get the pictures, and they didn't get the copy, and they didn't have the calendar put together. So this is much better than a health score. It's the literal indication that they're on track to fail. But guess what? It shows up early enough that I can fix it. And so it's not like a health score. I'm not combining them all together and saying this is a 70 out of 100. No, they didn't get their list put together. They're already red. And the good news is I know what to do about it. I need to help them get their list put in. Number 2, they haven't sent any emails. Well, it can't be, more than a couple things. They don't have photos and they don't have copies, so I can help them do that. But the point is, what I want are the behaviors, the things the customer has to do to make the first dollar selling on email, right? Okay, so I just have to have a simple list of what those things are, and then I have to track them. Now, that's more work because those things don't just show up in the system. I have to identify what they are, and then I have to watch and see if they've done them. But once you build a system like that, it's a very good early warning system because the customer doesn't know they're failing yet, right? They haven't sent their first email. They can't find the stuff, but they don't blame you yet. It's early days. They still think it's going to turn out great, which is perfect because I need their willingness. I need their good, positive attitude for them to work with me to solve it. Once they've given up, it's too late. So that's as an alternative to a health score, what I recommend is understand the results you produce and then identify the 1, 2, or 3 key behaviors your customers have to do to get there and then track whether they do. When they don't, that customer's red, run a play to solve that problem.
And you may already have the data to show what kind of time window you're dealing with. So if they don't do their list by this time, then there's this risk. And, you MIT guys come up with all kind of analytics and,
Well, we have that, by the way. Yeah. So it depends on the business you're in, right? Maybe your thing takes a year to do, but hopefully not, because that's really hard to, in the SaaS world, most customers need to engage fairly quickly or they'll fail. So what we found, we had a customer with very large, it's a famous company, you know who they are, they have a very large user base, and they thought that the key was about 30 days. Customers needed to get going, do their key stuff in the first 30 days. So we tested it. Guess what the real answer was?
Once again, I provide no answer to that.
It was
the whole thing. It's like Bizarro World.
Yeah, it was hours.
Whoa.
Yes. So what we found was that at least by 10 days, we had a nearly 100% prediction of who was going to fail if they hadn't engaged enough in 10 days. Wow. We think it might have been shorter, but we didn't have shorter data. So the point is they were way off, right? They thought 30, it's less than 10. It might have been 2 days for all we know. So we got to be very careful. Don't just assume you have this big, long time. The truth is your customer has other problems. They'll get discouraged and they'll move on. And so but at 10 days, what we found in their case was at 10 days, that was early enough that the customer didn't think they had failed yet. They still had a positive feeling about it. So there was plenty of time to intervene and get it back on track.
30 days, but it was actually hours.
That's incredible.
That meeting.
Well,
yes.
It's funny because there was an MIT study. The reason I thought of that was there was an actual MIT study many years ago where they were measuring how long you had to reply after a customer expressed interest, like, on an online forum, I'd like a callback. And most of the industry thought, within a week or within maybe 2 days would be really good. I'm sorry, what?
Was it like
It was 5 minutes.
Earth is round, Roger. The Earth is.
I'm sorry.
After 5 minutes, the response rate dropped off dramatically. So it's a similar thing. We don't have 5 minutes in customer success, but we don't have the time we think we have, and we got to get ahead of it. It's why onboarding is such an important thing too. We haven't talked about that, but that's very important.
Yeah. Part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, reach into that question.
Roger, because I'm looking at time, once again, I'm blown away. Thank you for, showing us the true shape of the CX Earth.
Okay.
Roger, I think we hit him the last question about the 4 playbooks of loyalty. So
we need to. Go ahead. Yeah.
So the 4 playbooks of loyalty. What are the 4 playbooks of loyalty, and how, for our listeners who are not in the SaaS world, how can they be transferred to non-SaaS or even small enterprises?
Yeah. Well, I can be fairly quick with this because we've actually, without realizing it, we've actually talked about them. So the first playbook is what we call customer results strategy. Forget the title. It's very simple. Do you know what your customer's result is? The thing they care about, that if they achieve, they'll renew. You just have to know that, right? Maybe it's more than one thing, but you have to know that. So you identify that first. You should really do it during the sale, but you can do it right at the beginning of the relationship as well. Okay, that's playbook 1. If you know it, write it down. Now we're going to track it. That's number 2. Tracking customer results. We call it measure and materialize, but if you're not measuring your customer results, you're not really customer centric. And figuring out how to do that is the most important indicator that a company is going to have high loyalty. The number 1 indicator is they track their customer results. Okay, so that's playbook number 2. Playbook number 3, help customers change their behavior. We focus so much on training them to use the product or bragging about its features. We don't realize they didn't want the product or the features. They want the result. They didn't want a 1/4-inch drill. They wanted a 1/4-inch hole. So the question is, how do we, instead of training them, I actually teach my customers, stop training your customers. Stop doing that. Focus on helping them learn how to use it effectively. Help them get their email copy and their photographs and their list put together. Those are the behaviors. And then the 4th one is, how do you predict which accounts are going to fail before they know they're going to fail? And that's what we call red account. But it's essentially those behaviors. How do I know early enough that they don't realize it and I can fix it and there's plenty of time? Those are the 4 playbooks. Oh, and your question was, how do those apply beyond SaaS?
Yeah.
I don't think those are even dependent on SaaS. Now, it's possible to think, well, but they're kind of dependent on a recurring revenue business. So maybe a magazine subscription or a food box subscription or something like that. But actually, more and more, I'm hearing from companies that aren't even recurring revenue business companies that they want customers for life. They want the loyalty so that that customer will keep transacting with them. Well, honestly, how else can you do it unless you're figuring out what they came for, showing them they received it, making sure they don't, make the mistake so they never receive that. Those are it's the same behaviors. All you have to do is think in the abstract. What is like if you're in a consumer business, what is the thing they really want? They're not buying my widget. They're buying an outcome. What is that outcome, right? Now, how do I show them they achieved it? Or how do I tell them how to see that they have achieved it? How do I know they're going to fail, and what can I do about that? It's really the same things. And of course, it has to be adapted to every business. But I think the principles are universal.
They definitely are. And Chick-fil-A comes to mind immediately. I think there are elements that we can immediately see in the Chick-fil-A model and that you don't see in other fast food chains. I definitely see this being transferable to brick and mortar and small services. So I hope audience, we start it over, rewind, listen to what he said again, write it down and implement. Because you might think you have 30 days and you only really have 5 hours.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, the earth is no longer flat. You just found out today from the Egyptians that it's a circle, right? It's round, okay?
Nice.
Wow, Greg. Greg, I'm usually not speechless. Richard would tell you that. I'm speechless.
Yeah,
I'm speechless because of, some people like to be disruptive, but I think there isn't value sometimes to everyone's disruptive, but this is critically important and useful disruption here. People need to understand that there are more predictive ways to impact your business and the success with your customer, and you just spell them all out really, really simply for us, which we appreciate, without using a whole bunch of long, big words and stuff like that. So thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for your insight, your wisdom, saying yes, taking the time. We will be inviting you back at some point, and we will create a reason in the Caribbean for you to come there.
Yes. Okay. Yes. All right.
I know you, and we'll try to target that between January and say April, so you can get out of Utah.
Boom. I'm down. Yeah. Set me up. I'm down. And thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure. Great conversation. I'd love to do it again.
Okay. That's part.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again on the IAM CX Podcast. You just heard from Greg Daines, CEO of ChurnRX, and we talked about everything you need to know to run your SaaS business successfully, and a lot of things you can definitely steal to run your general business successfully. So we want to thank Greg for doing that and sharing that with us. Want to thank my co-host, co-producer, and CEO, Richard Dorsey. I am Roger Nicholas, Director of Customer Experience at Allen Analytics and Marketing. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next podcast. Thank you so much for attending, and go win.